Now that we're able to write simple programs, we're going to start talking about how we organize our code for larger programs. And this brings us to methods in C#. Thus far, we've been writing all of our code in the main method of the application. But what is a method? In object-oriented programming, our focus is on creating these things called objects. And objects are the nouns of our world. They primarily contain data and methods. I go back to the example of a bank account. A bank account is an excellent example of an object. It would have data of account number and balance. The bank account is the noun. A bank account can also do things. We can deposit, withdraw, and transfer money from our bank account. Those would be the methods. Methods are the verbs. They are named blocks of code that perform tasks for us. When other bits of code want to use a method, it's referred to as calling the method. When we call a method by name, it commands it to run and perform its tasks. Why do we use methods? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The first is to reduce code duplication. If we have a block of code we want to use many times throughout the program in many different places, putting it inside a method and calling the method allows us to have all that code in one spot where it can be reused. If we didn't have a method, we would have to repeat our logic all throughout our code. And then if we ever wanted to make a change, we'd have to go to every single spot in the code and make the change. This would be a lot of work. We also use them to organize complex problems into small steps. In the case of a balance transfer for our bank account, the process for doing that would be rather complicated. First, we would have to figure out which account the money was coming from. We need to check the balance of that account and make sure that enough money exists to cover the transaction. Then we would have to go find the second account. We would have to make sure that that account was active and able to receive money. There would also be some kind of confirmation that would have to go back and forth between the accounts. We would never want to write this kind of complex solution as one large code block. It would be hard to read and hard to break down. So using methods allows us to take that complicated task and break it into its individual chunks. It makes it easier to test and easier to read. And that's where it comes to improving the readability of the code. Because methods have names, we can refer to blocks of codes by a meaningful English name. A good readable name reveals the intent of the code, so that programmers who come along behind us don't have to read the method code to understand what the intent of it was. If we have a method in a bank application called deposit, it's very clear to other programmers what deposit means and what that code should be doing. So if we want to create a method, there are 5 different parts that we're going to use. And we're going to go into these in more detail later. I'm just introducing the concept to you right now. The first is the access level, and this determines who can call the method. Sometimes we want anybody to be able to talk to a method, and sometimes we want to keep a method secret. Maybe it's something secure, maybe it's something that other classes should not call out of order, so we want to control access to it. The second part is the return type. Methods can optionally return data back to the caller. If we have a method called sum that takes in 2 numbers, we can return a number to the caller that contains the data that was created by sum. So the return type, does it return data? And if it does, C# wants to know what kind of data is going to be returned. Is it going to be an int? Is it going to be a string? Is it going to be a class? Methods also must have a name, and this name is the alias. When other pieces of code want to use the method, they are going to refer to it by the name that you give it. Next we have parameters. Parameters are things that are passed into a method. What data needs to be given to the method to do its job? In our example of a sum method, the parameters would be the numbers that we passed in that we would like the method to add up for us. The last thing is the code block. These are the statements that get run when the method is called. The code block is what steps of work need to be done. The first four parts of this, access level through parameters, those make up what we call the method signature. There's a couple rules we need to be aware of before we start creating methods. The first is that a method must be a member of a class. The main method that we've been using in the console is inside the program class. The signature of a method must be unique. We cannot have two methods that have the same type, same name, and same parameters. The name of the method can contain alphanumeric characters, so A to Z, 1 to 9, and the underscore. However, the first character of a method must be a letter or an underscore. You cannot start it with a number. It's very common in C# to capitalize the first letter of a method name. We call that proper casing.